Here's the thing, I've been teaching English here in Italy now for 7 years, and boy oh boy have I learned a thing or two about this profession. Now, I did a video about 3 years ago where I was really distilling what it's really like to teach English here in Italy, but today's video is a bit of an updated version on that because trust me, 3 years is a long time and I have experienced quite a bit in that time, which I want to share with you today because it's what no one really tells you about. And I know a few of you have been messaging me on my social platforms asking me about what it's really like. So I feel like I'm doing you a bit of a service by spilling the tea, shall we say, on what it really takes to teach English here in Italy, because you know, what is that expression? Forewarned is forearmed. And you know, I think it pays to just know everything that you can about something. So let's begin with the first aspect, and it really is teaching English in Italy is a rewarding job if you're the right fit. Now, what I mean by that is that you have to have some kind of passion as to what you're doing, because just speaking the language isn't enough. And so many people fall into this trap. They're like, oh, I speak English, I can teach it. Let me tell you, they are two very, very different skill sets. You grow up speaking a language, you know, it's second nature. You don't really pay too much attention as to why you're conjugating verbs in a particular way or why you're using a particular tense structure. It just comes to you without thinking. Take that and then try and explain it to somebody who has absolutely zero knowledge of the language and is really struggling to try to understand the way that we form the grammar aspects of the language, what certain phrasal verbs and idioms mean. And then you realise that it's not so simple. And I really think that people get it a bit twisted in this way. To speak English does not make you an English teacher, because there is so much more that goes into being a teacher that people don't really consider. Now, I touch on some of those skills in this video up here, so go and watch that next if you want me to go a bit deeper into this. But essentially, I will say fundamentally you need to have patience, you need to have some kind of passion and enjoyment in what you do. And also, I would say you need to be able to explain things clearly. There is one thing I cannot stand, and it is people who use really pompous, fancy terms to make themselves feel really clever and seem really, really educated. Let me tell you, the most intelligent people can actually distill something that is extremely complicated into the most simplest form that a child could understand. And this is the kind of paradox with this, because we grow up thinking, okay, this person uses such exquisite language that they must be really, really clever, but it's actually the reverse. If somebody can explain something to you in a really, really concise way and you understand it, that shows that you have a good knowledge of it. So don't feel like you have to be something that you're not when you apply for jobs here in Italy as an English teacher. Don't feel you have to have this extensive vocabulary just to, you know, seem like you know what you're doing. But I will say to you, you do have to be organised, you do have to have an awareness of the language and be able to explain it, know the nuances of the language. Now, if you're one of those people who perhaps isn't as confident in your ability as you should be, then you could consider taking a teaching certification such as a CELTA, for example. I see a lot of people here in Italy do this where English is not their mother tongue language. If they've got a certification in English, but they don't have like this whole mother tongue status, then you will find that those teachers tend to take CELTA certifications just as something extra, just to demonstrate even more their ability at teaching the language. Because trust me, prejudice exists here. You will see students that will favour mother tongue teachers over those who are certified in the language purely because they are mother tongue. Now, whilst I can understand why that might be for pronunciation and you would like to think knowledge of the language, there is a bit of a problem with that, because I have worked with some incredible colleagues who I would say sometimes are better than the mother tongue versions, but they are certified in the language. It is not their native tongue. And so, you know, I do think there is this prejudice that you'll come across here, particularly if you fall into this category. But you can do things like take a CELTA certification that tends to give people a little bit more kind of faith in you as a person. It gives you a bit more credibility as well, and also makes you feel a bit more confident in what you're doing. And I think, although I don't have this certification, I think it can be good for you if you don't feel confident in your own ability. Like, I came here to Italy with the experience of being in the police and of running my own business. So I have got a lot of life experience. And as such, I felt really confident in my ability to speak to people, to communicate, and to help others. But if you're not one of those people, the teaching certifications can certainly help you approach things like lesson planning and how you're going to develop your techniques in a way that you might not have original experience of. So something to consider, but teaching isn't for everyone, and it is a slightly easier route, I would say, and entry point into the Italian working system if you don't speak Italian very well, for example, because really there is a demand for English teachers here in Italy. And I haven't seen that demand wane at all in the course of the 7 years that I've been living here. In fact, every single late spring, early summer, I see different schools advertising for teachers. So, you know, it's a constant process. But of course, you have to understand that although it's an easy entry point, you have to also be good at what you do, because it's blimmin' obvious to everyone from the school to the students themselves if you don't have a clue what you're doing. So that's why I say to you, it's a really rewarding profession. It will teach you so much because you will learn about the culture, you will learn through the students that you teach. I've worked with high profile business people all the way down to preschool children and everyone else in between. And I can tell you, and I think now I must literally be at least in the hundreds of students, at least, I'm sure, because I've worked in 3 different schools for 7 years. Absolutely, I'm sure I've reached that point now. I have learned something from each and every one of them. And they have taught me not only about the life here in Italy and the culture, but also they have taught me things based on their own personal experiences that they have shared with me. And that's why I find this job so rewarding. But it's only rewarding if you're the right fit. So you've got to be honest with yourself. If you don't think you've got the patience to keep repeating the same things again and again, and to keep correcting students who are making the same mistakes again and again, or to manage students' expectations, because this is a big one. Sometimes students have a higher expectation of their level than what is actually reality. And you have to be able to manage their expectations in a way that respects their ambition, but is also realistic so that they can truly make the progress to reach their goals and not be in this kind of elevated sense of importance when it's not helping them and they're not going to make any progress. So there is a lot that goes into teaching, a lot of skills. It's not just having a qualification, being able to speak the language. There is a lot more that goes into it, but if you are the right fit, it is one of the most rewarding jobs you can have here. And certainly when I decided that I wanted to move to Italy back in 2018, one of the first things I wrote in my script, because I wrote a script kind of visualizing what my life would be like, was that I wanted a job that would help me to feel like I was part of a community and help to integrate me into life here. And I can honestly say, hands on heart, teaching ticks every single one of those boxes. So if you do think that you could be a good fit for this profession, then I wholeheartedly say go for it, because you'll have very little trouble finding a job here. Depending on what part of Italy you're in, but there is a demand because English is taught so terribly here in the majority of state schools that people often take up private lessons to improve themselves. So you have a real opportunity, but also you will gain so much from the experience and meet some great people. So it's this. It can help you to settle into life here, but you've got to be the right person for it. Secondly, I think that you need to be smart. Now, I'm not just talking intellectually smart, because of course that helps, but I'm also talking about being smart in other areas as well. First of all, in the type of school that you choose to work for, because there are different methods of teaching English here in Italy, from online all the way to in-presence private schools, and then all the way to state schools here in Italy. Now, I've never worked in the state school system here. I've only ever worked in the private education system, but I will put a link below in the show notes to the Ministry of Education's website. So if you would prefer to work in a state school, you can understand the process a little bit better. But certainly in the private school sector, you have to have your wits about you, because every school, every language centre has slightly different ways of operating, from how they will deal with you in terms of contract through to pay and conditions. I've worked in 3 different schools here in the time that I've lived in Italy to date, and I have had 3 very different experiences. Now, what you've got to consider first of all is that with private schools especially, you are more likely to work later hours. So depending on the type of school, my first school was a Montessori school, so I followed more of a traditional school day structure. I finished at 3:30 in the afternoon. Some days I would work a bit later to do like a homework club for the children, but essentially my days were more like the normal school days. However, if you work in kind of the private school system, as in like the language centres, your hours can vary. So my current school and the one before, I work until late at night. So 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock of an evening. So you have to ask yourself if this is something that fits in with your life. It's not this kind of la dolce vita, slow living life that you're kind of fed here in Italy. Working as a teacher is hard work, because depending on what you do and depending on the format that your school uses, you may very well have homework that you have to mark, you may very well have lessons that you have to plan on top of all of those hours that you're working. So you've got to realise it's not an easy job. It's not a job you can just float in and float out of without exerting any kind of sweat. It really depends on the school. Now, an area that you must be smart in concerns your contracts, because there are 2 different types of contract here in Italy when it comes to working contracts. Determinato, otherwise known as fixed term contracts, and indeterminato contracts, otherwise known as long-term contracts. Now, both of these contracts can be issued by private schools, but they tend to be dealt with in slightly different ways. So normally you will always start with a determinato contract. This has been my experience in 2 of the schools that I've worked at. So you begin with this determinato contract. Usually it's for the duration of the first school year. Sometimes it might be shorter, it might just be for a few months. And you can consider this to be almost like your trial contract. It's a chance for the school to see how you work, how you perform, and there's less obligation placed on the school. If you don't perform at the end of the contract, you say goodbye. With an indeterminato contract, these contracts are considered to be the gold dust of contracts here in Italy. And so if you have one of these, it's actually considered to be more difficult to be fired from a company. It's only if you do something like really, really wrong. And so employers are not in a hurry to give these out necessarily. They like to do this determinato route first. Now, something to note is that you should only ever be issued a couple of these determinato contracts. It is not possible for you to work at the same place of work, doing the same job, and consistently have your determinato contract renewed. After a certain number of times, it has to automatically transform into an indeterminato contract. Now, does this always happen here? No, especially here in the south. In one of the schools that I worked at, I was working with colleagues who had been on determinato contracts for years, and this is not right. I was very fortunate because in both schools where I've been issued contracts, I had my determinato contract immediately transformed into an indeterminato one, which is really how it should be, but it doesn't always work that way. And what you need to know is that with a determinato contract, as much as you can set your life up, as much as you have something in paper that shows that you're working here, I don't know about you, but there is always that sense of stress. Are they going to renew my contract? Am I going to have to look for a new job? Like, you don't have that feeling of stability, in my personal opinion, with a determinato contract, because there's always an expiry date at the end. With an indeterminato contract, you can be more relaxed. There's no expiry date unless you do something extremely wrong. You've got this job for as long as you need it, unless the company goes bust or whatever. So for this, you can be a little bit more sure within yourself, and it just gives you a better standing here in Italy, I think, with an indeterminato contract. Now, within the contracts themselves, you need to do your due diligence, because not every contract, even if it's legal, even if it's signed off by a lawyer, is necessarily accurate. Do your due diligence. Make sure you understand how much holiday leave you have. Make sure you understand if you get any extra payments in the summer or winter. Make sure you understand if you're even paid over the summer, because if you work for a school that doesn't open over the summer months, there's a high probability that you won't get paid. I experienced that in the Montessori school, and honestly, I cannot even begin to tell you, not getting paid for 2 months, how difficult that was, because as a teacher, you're not paid a handsome salary, shall we say. It's like the bare bones. And so if you are there trying to save money to be able to cover you for the months when you're not working, you have very little money left each month for the rest of the year. So consider this. It's far better if you can work for a school that actually opens over the summer. And these tend to be like the language centres. They tend to remain open. They might have a week or so closed during the summer months, but usually, depending on the school, that is paid leave. It's part of your holiday allowance. I cannot begin to tell you the peace of mind being paid over the summer actually brings you. Like, it's wonderful. And I didn't think I'd ever end up saying that, because it's not normal for me that you would work for a company and not get paid a few months per year, but that's how it can be here in Italy. So really check the small print and fine print and understand your rights and conditions. Also know a lot of these contracts are based on national contracts. So what you might find is that you are not given this hefty document when you sign a contract. You are given a couple of pages, a summary, if you like, of the main points that are applicable to you in your job role. But then you have to go and research on a national system, like the computer system or wherever you find the information, what the national contract is pertaining to your role. So yeah, it's all a bit like this. It's like smoke and mirrors here. Not everything is easy to understand, and you don't get everything given to you. You have to go and do the work yourself to understand your conditions. So it definitely pays to know what you're letting yourself in for, absolutely. Now, I will say there's also another angle that some schools can go down, which is by asking you to open a partita IVA. Now, this is the equivalent of declaring yourself as self-employed. So in other words, becoming like a freelancer. Now, you've got to be careful with this, because this was something that I only learned recently, in the sense that if you are asked to do this, you need to know that you are a freelancer. That means that you can refuse to work on certain days. You can say that you're not available to work at certain periods, and the school cannot say anything to you. If you find that the school are giving you a fixed schedule, you have to work every Monday at 9 a.m, or you have a full day of lessons every single day of the week, like in a planner, this is not right. That should be a contracted position, not a partita IVA, because with a partita IVA, you have that freedom, you have that flexibility. So be really careful about that, because this is something that I did in my last school, which I later realised I shouldn't have done, because really I was working with a schedule, and so I should have been given a contract at that school. So it pays to know these things, and you don't have people telling you this when you move here. You don't have people sitting you down saying you've got to know this, this and this. So I'm that person for you, because a lot of you will move to Italy and perhaps consider taking up this profession. So you really need to know what you're letting yourself in for, absolutely. I think as well, you need to be smart when it comes to understanding the way things work here, because every school will have their own procedures, their own ways of working. But I will say to you that not every school will communicate very effectively with their staff. If you're used to a culture where, you know, there are regular debriefs, regular team meetings, performance reviews, maybe like staff outings or team building days, well, they're a bit hit and miss here in Italy, and it really does depend on the school that you're working for. Some schools are better at this than others, but certainly when it comes to communication, this is what tends to let a lot of places down here in Italy. There is this kind of mentality of like, put up with it and shut up, you know, like there's not this mentality that encourages you to give feedback, to receive feedback, to work together with your colleagues. Certainly in the schools that I've worked in, it's been difficult sometimes to have kind of that bond with the people you work with, because either you don't have the possibility, there's no staff room, there's no place that you can congregate together and have a chat. It's not really encouraged, like, you know, there aren't any team building days, you don't have regular meetings, or it's the fact that you all work different shifts, and so you're kind of coming and going. And so you don't really have that opportunity to catch up with your colleagues. They're just people that you know you work with, but you never really get to form any kind of connections. So this is something else for you to be smart with, because if you want to do this job to meet people and to make connections, you may not have that possibility. It really depends on your school, very much so. And so you've got to be smart with the way that the working conditions can be here. You may find, especially here in the south of Italy, that you don't work for a period in the afternoon in these private schools, because usually from around 1 o'clock till around 4 o'clock, a lot of businesses will close. And what you will find is that usually you are given your lunch period within that time. Now, it might be that you work on a shift system where some days you work in the afternoon, but you have a bit more time off in the morning. So it all depends on the school. There isn't a uniform approach to anything in Italy. And so you've just got to kiss a few frogs until you find your prince. And this is the analogy that I associate with my experience of teaching so far here in Italy, because my first 2 schools were definitely the frogs, and now I feel like I found the prince. It's not a perfect prince, perfectly imperfect, I would suggest, but definitely a prince compared to my first 2 experiences. But here's the thing, every experience teaches you something. I wouldn't be sitting here now recording this video and talking to you if I hadn't had the experiences I've had. So, you've got to take from every single experience all the lessons and all the nuggets of wisdom that you can, because it will really help you to become better as a teacher. But be smart, okay? Not just intellectually, but smart on all aspects of teaching. The school you choose, the type of contract or partita IVA, if you're asked to open, the details of those, the conditions, the pay, all of it, to make sure you understand everything, okay? And also be prepared for a different working culture. You're not necessarily going to have those team building days that you might be used to. So just get ready for that. I would also say you get out what you put in. Now, this sounds obvious, but you will be surprised how many people I see who do this job half-heartedly. And as I said before, it is so obvious to everyone that is what that person's doing. They don't pay attention when they're teaching, they're distracted, they're not interested, they don't have any enthusiasm about their role, they're not imaginative, they're not really organised. They do it for the paycheck. But teaching is not a profession you should ever do for the paycheck, because what people forget is that as a teacher, you have a great responsibility. I can almost bet €1 that all of you can remember at least one teacher that you had growing up in your life. I can remember my English teacher in secondary school vividly, and it's this. That is the impact that teachers have on your life. Whether they're good or bad, there's always a lasting impact. And so you can't do this job half-heartedly, not if you really want to help people and make them achieve their goals. And so I don't really have performance reviews, I have to be honest. Observations sometimes, yes, to make sure that the method is being applied, but not sit down, you're doing really well, feedback reviews. As I said before, they don't always exist here in Italy, but the way I measure my performance myself is through the response I get from my students. And their response tells me whether I am doing a good job or not. And I see it, and it makes me feel so good, because I see students who come to lessons and they're talking like this, but you can literally see the tension in their body. And the minute you say to them, relax, don't worry about making any mistakes, it's like, and then they're like a completely different person. And then you see it with people who are genuinely happy that you have corrected them, or that you are supporting them. It's just the most wonderful thing. But you only get that when you put that level of passion into what you do. If you just open your laptop, or you just turn up for class and you just run through the motions because it's something you've got to do, you've got the bills to pay, it's not the same experience, and people feel it. And I think, for me personally, this job isn't an easy job. I really don't think it is. I always tell it to you how it is. But for what I gain from it in terms of personal satisfaction, in terms of personal impact, in terms of learning from people around me and the communication and developing and honing my communication skills, because that is essential, it makes it absolutely worthwhile. And a lot of people will say to me, well, don't you need to speak Italian to become an English teacher here? I would say it really depends on the school, but not necessarily. because a lot of private schools here actually encourage their teachers not to speak in Italian so that their students have a fully immersive experience. Because the danger is if you start saying a few words in Italian here and there, the students get lazy and they just revert to Italian without practicing and trying to speak in English. So it's this. It's not an easy profession by any means. If you have some interest in it and you want to make a lasting impact, it can be one of the most beautiful things. I have messages that students have written me, presents that they've given me, things that I will forever remember from these days of teaching that I would never have experienced had I not gone down this path. But you've got to put in to get out. And so that is the most important thing of all. It's the same for life. What you put into life is what you get back from it. You're not living the life you want. Maybe you're not putting enough effort in. You're not here in Italy yet. You've got some work to do. So it is this. Teaching English in Italy is incredible. And I highly recommend considering this as a career, even if people say to you, oh, it's all anybody ever does is come here to teach English. Well, there's a demand. So when there's a demand, you should meet it. However, I will say to you, it's not as simple to come here and teach English now if you're coming from a non-EU country, because it will require some kind of visa sponsorship. And I don't know many schools here in Italy that actually do this. I think they prefer to find people who already have the legal right to live here or are from an EU country. But you have to make those inquiries yourself to know if it can be a possibility for you. But if you can, then I highly recommend becoming a teacher of English here in Italy. But just be prepared for everything that I've spoken to you about in the video today. This is the conversation I wish someone had had with me when I first came here and decided this would be the perfect profession. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you'll enjoy this one next, because I talked to you about a concept that Steve Jobs discussed in a graduation speech in 2015 that can absolutely change your experience here in Italy if you're struggling. I will see you in the next video.